colleagues, whether we listen to the presentations before we make comments or interventions. Yeah. So who is the next one to go? Hinga.
The honorable chairs and members of this committee, I'm delighted to be here this morning and humbled also to be making this presentation before my seniors. Allow me to begin by making a disclaimer. One is that, as you all know, that this housing levy is one of the things that was highly litigated. It is still before the courts. So today I'll try and avoid going to the merits and demerits of the housing levy per se, because that judgment will be made on the 24th of November, after which we should be free to talk about it in greater detail, but I'll try and cover as much as I can. Number two, Chair, is that at the end of my submission, hoping that the work of this committee will effect some changes in the Constitution at some point, hopefully, I would like to submit two requests. One is that under Schedule 4 of our Constitution, where the Senate religiously allocates resources to the counties, there is a small omission in that our Constitution has envisioned urban areas to be devolved, but it is missing in Schedule 4. And what that means is that our urban areas are not getting any resources unless it is the money from the World Bank that comes in as conditional grants. And that is a big problem, because our cities and towns are dying and decaying because of lack of investment. And number two, I'd like to make a submission before this committee that we need to relook at how we address the issue of marginalization. I think the way we have defined marginalization, it is a little bit unfair to the class of people we call the urban poor. And I'd like to submit before this committee that the urban poor is probably the most marginalized person in Kenya. And we need to relook at how we define marginalization, because if we only define marginalization based on areas, and yet there is somebody who is probably a meal away from starvation, a person who has no basic sanitation, they actually pay to use ablution facilities. For someone who faces what we call the penalty of poverty, which is they pay 172% more for water than you and I. They pay up to 147% more for electricity. I think it is the high tide away. There are huge population. Chair, before I then get into the presentation, allow me to set a little bit of context. We all know the issue of the housing levy. At some point, I had to run to my good senior, Professor Ndongo, because I was confused whether we were actually debating a housing bill or the finance bill. And so all that sweating, Chair, that you are seeing coming out is because I was...
You become national, very famous with that sweating. And I'm happy you're talking about it, because you're wondering what has become of Hinga.
Let me say, the Honorable Vice President, that when I went to Professor Ndongo for some counseling, I was expecting some lessons in economics, but he referred me to the Bible, and he read for me Genesis chapter 3 verse 19, and he told me, Hinga, out of the sweat of your brow you shall eat. So sweating is biblical.
But the Bible seems to have helped in not sweating today.
Maybe a bit too early to call it. Chair, there is a very interesting report that was done by the World Bank in the year 2017. Now, like anybody who would like to make comments on the issue, matters to do with housing, just get a copy of that. It's available online. It is called Unavailable and Unaffordable. And I believe this study painted a very good picture about the housing situation in Kenya. There are things that are indisputable, and I think where things become a bit murky is the how to solve. But there are certain things that are not in dispute. Number one, we are one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. We have over 500,000 people who are coming to urban areas every year. That is a fact. Number two, Chair, is that if you look at the percentage of what you call the urban population, at the moment, and these are very old statistics, which is 2019, after the census, we had about 6.5 million Kenyans living in slums. That is also a fact. So if you're adding 500,000 people every year into urban areas, when they come to those urban areas, what do they find? Chair, they find something which is interesting, and I know a professor here will back me up because of it's a lot more in economics. Chair, what you find is that we have very low incomes in Kenya. And where you have low incomes, and then you have got very expensive land, ordinarily then what happens is that rentals tend to be very high. Okay, low incomes, expensive land, rents tend to be very high. And so therefore, your working class, I'm not talking about people who are not working, I'm talking about your working class, people who wake up, some even earlier than we do, to go to work, cannot be able to afford the kind of rentals that we find in the urban areas. And then what happens is that they get pushed out in a process which is called gentrification. You start pushing them out, okay? But where do they go? Some may say, why can they go to Mlolongo? Why can they go to Kitengela where there is a lot of land? The challenge, Chair, is that they need to be close to where they work. Because again, if they move further away from where they work, the cost of transport becomes a hindrance. So where do they go? They go and set up informal settlements. And that is why, Chair, as of 2019, we had 1,141 informal settlements in this country. They do nothing. If we do nothing about it, Chair, in a few years' time, our major cities will be nothing but major slums. So that's also an important context to be able to put. Now, there is a study that has been done by the Center for Affordable Housing in Africa. In 2016, Nairobi had been ranked as having the third most expensive land of the cities that were polled in Africa. Today, Nairobi has the most expensive land in the continent. So how do you have most expensive land? You have got very low incomes, and so this is an issue that I believe should be able to bring all of us together, because it is ours to solve, irrespective of which political divide you come from. Even us who live in most affluent areas, you can attest that there is a slum next to where you live. And at some point, if you do nothing, a high wall is not going to keep you safe. There will be a slum right outside your gate. And so I believe that this issue of housing should actually not divide, but actually should bring people together. I was privileged to be in the last government, honorable chairs, and housing was part of the Jubilee agenda. Also, housing was a core pillar in the Azimio manifesto. As a matter of fact, where we ended, the Kenya Kwanza proposed 3% on the levy. We actually ended at where Azimio had proposed, which was 1.5%. So I would like to believe that if we are all genuine and we put away our political caps, we can be able to look at this matter of housing, soberly, and we can be able to agree. We may disagree, we may not agree on everything, but we agree we have a challenge. So, Chair, I'm going to go very quickly to the economics of housing, because I think that is very, very, very important. the real merits of the levy itself. So I have a presentation, Chair, which is has 4 headings, which is a quick introduction, the economic context, the economic recovery, and then I'll go a little bit into the housing fund and offerings. Chair, the Kenya Kwanza government has a plan, and our plan is to have 1 million Kenyans owning their homes in this first dispensation. Now, Chair, the reason that number is not a thumbsuck, it is because in Kenya we have a housing demand of 250 homes a year. The market is only able to produce 50,000. And of the 50,000, only 1,000 is affordable housing. So we have got 49,000 for the high end, that is a 3%, and then 97% of Kenyans are left with the 1,000 that is being produced by the market today. So our plan is ambitious and bold because we believe that we have a systemic failure in housing in Kenya. And for us to be able to understand how this systemic failure has stepped back into history and realize that at the turn of independence, when we came up with the housing policy, we were, as a government, building homes through National Housing Corporation, site and service, and that happened until the late 80s, when the infamous, when we got into trouble with the IMFs and the World Bank at the time, and we got into structural adjustments. And at that time, one of the things that we were told to exit from was housing. And from that point to date, the likes of National Housing Corporation has never received any funding from government. Most of you perhaps have lived in estates that were funded through National Housing Corporation or the old municipal councils. So, Chair, let me go quickly to the economics of housing, which I think is very important to understand. One, Chair, is that we know right now we are in a bit of an economic meltdown of some sort. And this did not just start now, it has been there from COVID. We never recovered from COVID. We are in Russia, we never recovered. And we are having challenges because and when economies are contracting, Chair, the objective, the primary target is to make sure that you do not get into a recession. Getting into a recession, Chair, to get out of a recession is more expensive than preventing yourself getting into a recession. Now, Chair, as I said, the do nothing is not an option. And this is a case where you get presented with bad options. When you're going through an economic meltdown, when you look at the options that you have, very few of them are good options. Then when you take the context that our economies lack resilience, we don't have enough social safety nets, so that when you have an economic meltdown, you can be able to send checks to the poor people and even to the working class who sometimes get laid off. Chair, we have a situation of dilapidated supply chains. So I don't know whether I'm going backwards or forward. Okay. Then, Chair, I read something yesterday in the Nation newspaper, and I was a bit surprised by what I read there, because I guess trying to paint that this government has borrowed so much money, they failed to understand that part of the reason why our debt has increased, even without borrowing, is that because some of our borrowing is in hard currency, and our shilling has depreciated. Even without borrowing, the debt has gone up. So our currency is devaluing, we have high inflation, we have rising interest rates, we have uncertainty that is there in the market. Chair, we have seen in our own context here, we have got a huge unemployment issue, we have a huge youth bulge, we have our economy is around contracting, manufacturing, we have had prolonged drought, we have had serious impact from COVID, and I've said even other places like in the US, where they are increasing interest rates to manage their own inflation, it is actually causing capital flight. If you look today at the stock exchange, the shares are misbehaving, and some of those companies have very good fundamentals, but they are depreciating. So therefore, Chair, I really want to make this point very clear that, you know, sometimes to the public it looks like the policymakers, maybe we just sit down and we don't really apply our minds on some of these things. It is, I sat there when COVID came knocking on our doors. And when you looked at the options that we had, there was an inverse relationship between trying to contain the disease and the economy. And Chair, there were many examples. For example, South Africa went on to what is called hard shutdown. The effect of hard shutdown, you saw, was something which was called an insurrection. People got tired of being kept at home, and they went and broke into supermarkets and took all the booze. In Brazil, on the other hand, they assumed that this is like flu. Okay, so what did? They were relaxed, go to the beach, enjoy yourself, in Homa, to meishi na Homa all this time. What happened? There were caskets that were being deposited at their state house because people died. So you're faced with very challenging and balancing situation. So Chair, during that time, you are either going to go to austerity or you have got to increase government expenditure. Now, when you look at the Great Recession, which was in 2008, if you look at what the US and Europe did, they did the opposite of each other. The US went on a major capital investment in infrastructure. Europe, on the other hand, went on a serious austerity measure. What happened is that the US got out of the recession much faster. Europe, you saw the likes of Greece and all those other places, they went, they had a lot of challenges. Another example, Chair, is in the 1930s when we had the Great Depression. And when FDR, then the president of the US, the strategies that he put, one of them was what is called the extended public works, which gave birth to something which is called the American Dream, which was printing houses as you can. As we get to the economics of housing, you'll understand why there was a focus on housing because of its long supply chain. So, Chair, So there are several strategies that can stem a recession under this condition. One of them is creating consumptive demand, encouraging spending, creating jobs in industries with multiplier effect. Now, Chair, and this is almost like a paradox, because you need to be spending where money is shrinking, because revenues are contracting. But you're saying you need to spend to be able to give people more money to spend so that you don't get into a recession. So, Chair, if you look at certain economies like the US, during this economic meltdown, what did they do? During COVID, what did they do? They printed money. They gave people checks. They did something which is called qualitative easing, which is they bought back their bonds. Why? Because they wanted to make sure that there is money circulating in the economy. Because when there is an economic meltdown, what you don't want to do is lack of that spending. And so, Chair, as I get now to the context of why we have put so much emphasis on housing, it is because in Kenya we may not have the powers to print those checks. We may not be able to have the kind of monies to buy back our bonds. But there is something that we can be able to do. And what is that? We can be able to put checks in people's hands by having a deliberate plan that is focused on creating the consumptive demand while solving a decade or a century-old problem of housing. And that, Chair, brings me to the issue of the housing levy. So, Chair, as I've said, our investment in housing projects helps us to issue what is called the stimulus check, which will make the required investment in housing, which in turn will expand enterprise, and it will create jobs, and that will be to the benefit of the citizens. Now, it's important to understand why you want money to be spent, and especially when we're talking at the lowest level, which is the local economic area. It is because, especially when you're spending money at the bottom of the pyramid, that money tends to circulate around there. You see, today, if I gave my good friend Omar Hassan 10,000 shillings, he will probably spend it Okay, Hinga, no, he didn't partake some of those other drinks, so maybe not a good example. But maybe those are two drinks. Maybe he'll go spend that money outside the country. If you put 100 shillings,
It's okay, you can use up your one day.
That's why, Chair, they were not served to tea. They were served to that drink is later.
So, Honorable Wandai, I can see you after this, and I'm sure. Anyway, on a serious note, so Chair, the impact of spending money at the bottom of the pyramid is that money actually never leaves. It keeps on circulating around that area. You don't need to be an economist to believe that. But Chair, there is something that is important to understand, is that it's not like Kenyans live in open spaces. Kenyans have houses, but those houses do not meet the basic definition, what is in our constitution and even in the UN, of what is decent housing. And that is why I believe the issue of housing was in all the major parties' manifestos. Okay.